Thank you very much for coming and joining us this morning. Actually, better than that, thank you to those of you that are going to give up the whole day to come and hear some of the observations that Professor Curtis Bonk has to make and learn from some of the things that Kurt has been doing over a vast number of years in relation to technology-enhanced learning, open education, e-learning, use of instructional systems, technology. So it's a really good opportunity for us to come together as a network of individuals, connected individuals, to think about how we can learn some lessons from Curtis and build a brighter technology-enhanced learning future for King's College London. You will not get bored, folks. I promise you that. Curtis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Wow. I know a bit about this stuff. No one knows it all. Just like psychology, there's people who specialize in motivation, classroom management, feedback. Just like nurses. We have nurses in the room. Some of you have different specialties. The same is true here. No one reads and knows all the literature. However, Stanford and the U.S. Department of Ed did a study, a meta-analysis of hundreds of researchers out there. What they found is that blended was the best of across all methods. Fully online was second best, and face-to-face fared the worst. But it depended on the content area, and it depended on the approach, the structure, the instructor embedded in the course. So, we do know that there can be improved pedagogy from blended, because now you give time for reflection. Students can think about your activity in class. If we didn't finish the debate in class, we can go online and finish it in Blackboard or what are you using here? Moodle, Blackboard? Moodle. Okay, interesting. How many of you have used Moodle here? How many use something other than Moodle in an online class? What are you using, Simon?
Well, we used to use Blackboard.
Yeah, Blackboard. Anyone else? Yeah. You had your hand up? Same. How about you?
And SharePoint.
SharePoint. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, interesting. So, we all have different frameworks that we're working from. We're using Sakai, which is like Moodle in a way. And we're now switching to something called Canvas at Indiana. Despite spending millions of dollars to build Sakai, we're now getting rid of it and moving to another ship. These are all giant ships, So we know it can improve pedagogy, more interactive, more authentic. We know it can increase access for students. When I'm here, I can give feedback to them. When I was in Finland last week, I can give feedback to my students in the hotels or wherever. Access and flexibility for some people is the most important thing. Now, I was a board accountant or CPA, and distance learning changed my life. Television, correspondence changed my life. I could take those courses at night, as well as night school, and get into grad school in psychology and educational psychology and technology. Increased cost effectiveness? Perhaps. There's some debate about that. Being an accountant, I know that sometimes blended learning actually costs more than face-to-face because you're adding additional contents to it. The first time you develop an ebook component or a simulation or an animation, you're going to have add-on costs. So many people in the medical field write grants to get those media elements added to their courses. So these are some of the three things that we do know about, but this is not a firm one here, cost effectiveness. This is my handbook, by the way, that's the cover. There's a lot of growth all of a sudden. Now, blended learning started in the corporate space. In higher education in Canada, they called it mixed model. And in the military, they called it hybrid. Has anyone heard of hybrid learning? Use the word? Hybrid means the interbreeding of two or more species of animals to create a mongrel. So we stay with blended instead of hybrid. Anyway, you can look it up in Webster's. In the K-12 space, there's a guy named Clayton Christensen at Harvard who's known for disruptive technologies in business. He's had major illnesses, almost died a couple of times. He's come back from strokes and whatnot, and he's moved into the K-12 space from the corporate. And he's looking at how technology is disrupting things at the K-12 level. And he has many free reports now that you can download if you're interested, because what they do is a really nice job of defining what it is and giving you models of blended. So the second myth is blended learning is easy to define. Third one is blended learning is hard to define. The definition we went with in the book is blended learning refers to events that combine aspects of online and face-to-face instruction. Very simple. But there are many other definitions out there to get more convoluted, much more complex, and they throw everything in like a kitchen sink approach to blended learning. It's debatable what exactly blended is, but this is historically relevant. People didn't use the word blended till online became popular. It became available. Now, we could say Plato did blended learning. People had a book, they could walk away and read his book. That's a form of blended learning. Vikings had, on their ships, dropped off books at remote ports and let people learn through a correspondence variety. The people that I mentioned earlier, the Clayton Christensen Institute, have a report where they say blended learning is any time a student learns at least part in a supervised brick and mortar location away from home, at least part through online delivery with some control over time, place, pace, path, or pace. You have some control over when you're learning, where you're learning, how you're learning, the timing, all that kind of stuff. So that's what they look at, the combination of formal education and, a formal education program in which a student learns at least part through online delivery and at least part through supervised brick and mortar, so it's combining things. Now, the Sloan Foundation in the US said that a course that's 30 to 80% online is blended. I think that's silly, but it served a purpose back when they did this about 10 years ago. I really think anything more than 1% online to 95 is a blended course. I'll just be inclusive. Anytime you put anything on the web, I'll call that a blended course in some way, shape, or form, because you've had to think about how to put that up and why you're doing so. They call a 0% course traditional or boring, and then they call over 80% a fully online. Now, I kind of disagree, but this is a framework. So people will know what I'm saying when I say blended learning. Blended is the same as hybrid. I kind of talked about that earlier. Well, the problem of this, people know what I'm saying, is that sometimes you're talking to people like Mark, who now is more administrator than a teacher, right? Administrators are concerned about program blended learning. What percent of time do students come to campus for a residency component? What percent of time are they off campus, you see? They're talking a different language than professors, lecturers, who say, I'm going to do my debate online. They're talking about activities they're doing. Administrators are talking about whole programs, the whole institution. Faculty, instructors, professors are talking about class activities and course activities. So it's a different conversation. Myth number 6, knowing how much to blend is vital. On this continuum, the Sloan Foundation, the Pew Foundation had studied 30 large section undergraduate classes in algebra and sociology and psychology, some of which they didn't do much at all to enhance the class with technology, just some PowerPoints. Some they did 50-50 online, some was fully online with options for face-to-face meetings. The ones with the holes in there had an optional face-to-face meeting. And it really didn't matter if you're 0% online, just or minor, 10% or 50 or 100, they all reduced student attrition. They all enhanced retention rate. 25 out of 30 had an improvement in student test scores, competencies, skills. This you probably haven't read this study, but this is a fabulous study that was done probably almost 9-10 years ago now. So it's been out there for quite a while. And as you see, how much you blend does not matter. 43%, 44%, people ask me, what percent? It doesn't matter. Number 7, blended learning works everywhere. Well, we know that it tends to work really well in theory-driven, theory classes, writing-intensive classes, classes where certification changes fast, like accounting after Enron. I took an ethics test when I was an accountant, 30 minutes to study it, 30 minutes to take the test. Was I more ethical after that? Probably not. Okay? I wrote ethics cases for Arthur Andersen well before Enron. They didn't work. Okay? True story, actually. I don't know if they used any of them. So where you have certification changing, like in accounting or other fields in finance after the big crisis of 2008 and 7, 8, 9, or in the medical fields, many of you in the medical fields where things change faster than what can get in the books, that's a prime area for blended learning, because you can enhance your classes with new contents, new simulations, new cases, new rules, new regulations, new procedures for surgery, whatever it happens to be. We have dentists in here too, new procedures. Advanced placement, well, that's more for students getting into college. Introductory classes, large section undergraduate classes where you might enhance it, the course, and personalize it through online cases. Through online activities, communities that you build, discussion forums and things like that, or practice tests in anatomy. I'll talk a bit about that, practice tests. Required classes. Anytime you have a required class, you might have students who are ill, right, or at a conference or whatever, to have some components online they can catch up and so forth. Courses we have working students, full-time working students. You might have some blended components for them so that they have that option of, every other week coming to the local center and have class, and every other week online. So spread over a distance. In Canada, in Alberta, where I spoke on blended learning to folks there in Edmonton area, actually. And folks in summertime weren't coming to my talk. I said, why are they staying home? Why don't they come, 100 miles, drive in for the talk? He said, well, in the winter they drive here. We have ice bridges, but right now we have lakes up there and they can't drive. So we do blended learning in the summer. We do face-to-face in the winter. Just the opposite of what I thought in northern Canada. You would think just the opposite, right? Examples of blended learning include online labs, discussions, mentoring. I have my students being mentored by prior students in my class. They come back and sign up to mentor other students. I have people in the field, practitioners, who offer my students feedback on their field experience reflections. My students observe schools and they reflect on concepts they've learned. I have experts come in to give feedback. I have weekly or bi-weekly experts come into my class from Coventry. I'll show you a Serious Gaming Center in Coventry where they came in to my class. Pre-assessments, reviews, tests, practice tests. Students want to know if they know the content, so online you can put a lot of practice tests and reviews. It's helpful for them. Number 8, people learn more in face-to-face than blended or fully online. Well, I talked about this earlier. The fact is that the research shows blended is the best of all formats. And it makes some sense because now you have face-to-face and you have online reflections. You have synchronous and asynchronous reflections and so forth. Less parking needs, space issues, opportunity to interact with other humans. And my international students participate more online than they do face-to-face oftentimes. So that's number 8. Number 9, I mentioned earlier. Administrators and instructors can have a logical discussion about blended. Everyone's talking about different things. Administrators are talking about programs and institution blends. We have students come for a summer residency in our online MBA at Indiana. They come for 2 weeks. The administrators care about that. The instructors are here at the course level talking about what they're doing to enhance their class. Number 10, there's no one best model of blended learning, or there is a best model. Well, there isn't. This model is called the bookend model, where you have an online activity to begin and an online activity to end, and in the middle, you meet face-to-face. This is popular with corporates, with Microsoft and IBM, and this is an IBM model right there, where they save money for their sales training or marketing people on hotels and on food. You only meet for a couple of weeks face-to-face. Our military does this in the U.S. They have a kind of a little different approach. They do a online experience to start, fully online, asynchronous. Then they go synchronous tactical maneuver training. Then they meet at Fort Knox for 3 weeks face-to-face. It's called Crawl, Walk, Run. And I studied the program at Fort Knox, actually. Their captain's career training is online and then face-to-face. So let's look at some sample models and then some examples and activities that I will walk you through how you can use things. So we're going to look at a few simple models that actually recently come out of the K-12 area. As I said earlier, the K-12 has just started to embrace blended learning. The handbook that I wrote or had edited is all higher education. So I'm going to give you an example of both. Model number 1 is face-to-face as primary, and you supplement that face-to-face with online exams, online cases, online supplements, online reflections, online discussion activities, team activities. This is the one most of you will use. Or face-to-face is primary, we supplement it a little bit. Now, how many of you are doing blended learning already, by the way? Anyone tried it? Yeah. In your area, again, was nursing? Yeah, nursing, yeah. Dentistry, yeah. History. One more. Someone else had a hand up. Yeah. You're doing blended a little? No? A little. A little. In what area again?
Pardon?
In what area?
Forensic science.
Forensics, right. Okay, so 4 different areas.
There's a lot of people underselling themselves there. I know that for sure.
Ah. So this is a common approach, simple approach. We supplement our classes. It's the one that most faculty feel most committed to because they're doing face-to-face, they're comfortable, they would tinker. We try stuff out on the fringes a little bit on the edges, right? And in a way, this whole day is kind of like that, kind of stretching a little bit with what we're safe and pushing you out and stretching you a little bit this direction. So we keep going a little bit in that way. So second model, rotation. We have a class like this, and we move to a computer lab. We might go online, we come back for a teacher-led activity. This I do with some of my undergraduate classes where we meet face-to-face for a lecture, then we go try some things out in a computer lab, and we might come back and do things online. I use it a lot with my students who are doing field experiences, where we reflect on the field experiences, practicums and so forth online, and we connect it back to the teacher-led. Number 3, curriculum is primarily online with instructors available face-to-face. Now, this is used by our technical institutes across the U.S. where they have maths that are taught, geometry and algebra, and students are nervous about math, so they have instructors waiting for them. University of Phoenix uses this. Instructors are waiting. If the students get lost, they come to the center. If they're not lost, they just learn online. So you choose the face-to-face when you want. And that should say number 4 there, misnumbered, but number 4 is an online lab activity. So you have students, like my pre-service teachers, studying in the field, reflecting out in the lab, out in the field, accountants training or social work training or occupational therapist training, physical therapist. My daughter's trying to become an OT person. She's right now in the field in a hospital. She's reflecting online on what she's learning, and her professors are giving her feedback. In effect, they're using blended learning in that way for occupational therapy and for physical therapy and so forth. This should be number 5, self-blend. Now, the University of Illinois at Springfield tried this approach about a decade ago, where they had every single class online and every single class face-to-face, and they let the students choose which ones they wanted. They self-decided which approach they want to go. This is a direction we're heading in some ways, to give students choice of a face-to-face, especially in ones that have many sections of the same class. We have 1 online section or 2 online sections, 8 are face-to-face, and you choose which ones you want. Bookend model I mentioned. You've got an online to begin, online to end, and in between you're doing face-to-face kinds of things. Simple thing. Anchor model. Now this is one that most of you will feel comfortable with. With an anchor model, you start with what you're doing, face-to-face, and you move online. You anchor it in and you meet your students face-to-face, you do some things, and you move to the web. This is how I started in '97. I had my students meet me for undergraduate educational psychology. We met the first week, maybe second week, and then we rotated online. And actually we met again at the very end. On week 15, we came back. It was more like a bookend. We met and then we came back and shared what we learned. But this is a common model used by a lot of folks. IBM, when they wrote to me about their chapter in my handbook of blended, they said, we'll give you 2 chapters. And the second chapter was, they gave me this model. At first, they didn't want to give me any chapters, and they ended up giving me 2. This model I call the degree of humanness model, because you start with, on level 1, quick webcasts, web pages, online books that the student interacts with, gets from the web, tries some things out, sample cases and so forth, and that's all it is. It's computer feedback on whatever activities you're doing. They get more enhanced. Here it's just books and webcasts and so forth. Level 2, you're getting online simulations and scenarios and things that actually you take a test on and the computer does score it. Level 3, you're with other humans doing an online lab and you're interacting with them asynchronously, forming a community of practice. And at level 4, you meet other humans and you try things out. Now our military does this. Crawl, walk, run. They crawl, they walk a bit, and then they run with it. They try things out face to face in the end to see if they've learned something. So what IBM was able to do is offload 75% of their training to the web and put 25% face to face. They saved a lot of money in this fashion. Okay, well, I'll give you some examples here on blended learning, but let me pause for a second. We've gone through 10 models or so of blended learning, and maybe should pause for a second and have you ask me if you have any questions about blended learning so far. And myths about blended, models of blended, yes. That was a talk I gave yesterday in Cambridge a bit. I had some information about that. There's some data showing that actually in these giant classes that are being taught free to the world, 2/3 of those students are coming from the developed world, already have degrees. They're going to, people already have bachelors, not going to people who actually need it necessarily because of an access issue. So there is still that. I mean, in terms of the global impact here, whether it's helping kids in the Philippines or where I was a couple of years ago. And the reason I actually made this book free is my publisher was trying to sell my previous books at 3 times the price in the Philippines, sent 2 copies to a conference of 1,000, and I promised the next book would be free. Similarly in Thailand a couple of months ago, you see access in the main cities, but not out in the rural communities necessarily. So you see it in Chiang Mai and Bangkok, but not out in Marasarakam or other parts of the country. So yes and no. The answer is yes, more people are getting access, but not necessarily to the degree that we want them to get access. The MITs of the world have over 1 million people learning online from their free online classes, coming from all over the world, 200 some countries, but yet it's dominated by people from English-speaking countries and from people who already have degrees. And young people though, fairly young, 25, 26-year-old, and dominated by men initially. More than 60% are men learning from this with degrees already. So it's a great question. Maybe I didn't fully answer, but during break we can get into it more. Other questions? Yeah. There are companies out there will sell you biology lab experiences, physics lab. There are others that University of Colorado Boulder, there was a whole series of labs for chemistry and biology that are all free, little modules that you can incorporate to explain heat or motion or whatever it is in physics, and then they've expanded into other areas. It's coming up here a little bit. So some things actually are free that you can grab from others. They're open educational resources, what's called OER. Others you might have to purchase along with the books that you get from whatever the publishers that you're getting things from. Others are self-designed. So we designed a whole series, a suite of best practices in teacher education, and we went and interviewed teachers out in the field and put those up with reflections from the teachers on how they're meeting the standards. We had the standards themselves up. We had reflection activities among the students. There were resources to explore, so the videos weren't the only thing. Now you can annotate video. I'm going to end today with showing how to annotate video. You can chop videos up. There's a tool called Tube Chop that will enable you to chop a YouTube video into 2-minute segments, 50-second. If you don't want to show the whole thing, and students, once you put it in, they want to see the whole thing. You can put it into 50-second and show the concept and move on to something else. So the lab components, you have more control over than in the past. In the past, you just put up the whole thing. Now you can annotate them, chop them up. There's actually something called Vialogs. We can discuss videos, video dialogues. These are the tools that are just part of the second wave. In the first wave, it was talking head stuff. Now we're moving to enhance, web enhance, or e-purpose our books and e-purpose our videos. And we're moving from an age of Wikipedia to Videopedia. And so when you're talking about online labs, sure, text is important, cases are important, but so are video components that can get at dual coding theory. We know we learn better if you store things visually and verbally. And I'll end with that today in part 4. So if you're building your own lab, you should think about what are the media components. Part 2, my R2D2 model gets at 4 things you need to think about, and that, some people call it learning styles. Most people in psychology don't believe in learning styles, and I was trained in psychology. However, they do a great service for reflection on your professional practice. They still make sense, despite them not holding reliability and validity, just like Myers-Briggs personality inventory. I'm giving a long-winded answer to your question, but the fact of the matter is, if you're building a lab, there are at least 3 options, and it's probably going to be a combined option you approach. It's designed, personally designed, because you want things specific to your institution and program. Second, there are free resources you might as well think about using. And third, there are some things that come with your books that you're buying, or you should consider to change the texts and the contents and so forth. I know we have someone from Epigeum here in the back. Where'd she go? And so, I'll be talking to her tomorrow, but they're building programs there as well in blended learning. In fact, right now, they're building a blended learning program. So there are people in the vendor space, publisher space, thinking about these elements. But to be honest, a lot of people self-design. You do need to do that to some degree, but with so many online resources, the best approach is a mixed approach, because I think we all need to give ourselves a license to sit in a closet for 1 hour and just explore the web. There's so much you can find I've talked to nurses, I've talked to dentists, public health people, engineers, psychologists, and I can spend 1 hour exploring, and I'm showing people stuff that they never saw before because they don't give themselves a license to look. Now, there are websites out there that index all the free contents. One website that comes from the US is called Merlot, like the wine, MERLOT.org. And if you haven't seen Merlot, it's peer-reviewed. They have a conference, they have a journal, and there's 24,000 learning objects up at Merlot that are peer-reviewed. Merlot.org, it's existed since 1999, and many people don't know about it. I have a book called The World is Open. That's kind of related to Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat book, if anyone's heard of The World is Flat book here. In there I talk about Merlot and another website called Connections, and in here in the UK you have Durham. They are places that index free contents. You should think about that when you design your lab or anything you plan to do. You should think about that. That's two great questions. So you get a third before pushing on. Third question? Yeah.
So I'd be interested also in interactive sessions, you know, when you do, I mean, do you run those where you've got pupils, I don't know, some kind of, like a mini conference call again? Do you?
Yes. Okay, so we have web conferencing, you know, definitely so. Most recently I'm trying Google Hangouts. I've done Skype, but we use Adobe Connect at Indiana, which is very simple to use. And the reason I like it is you can save and archive the file for students who are sick, who missed it. I'm not sure if you have Adobe Connect here. If you do, I highly recommend taking a look at Adobe Connect because it's simple to set up. Once you get a URL, you can use that the whole semester, at least by us, and you can just send that link to anyone. You can get a guest from around the world on a minute's notice and up there in your class as a guest talking to your students. I often will have students from guests from Australia, from Canada, from the UK, from Korea, Japan. They pop in one of my classes on emerging technologies. I have 7 guests a semester from all over the world that were reading their article that week, and the students might, and a lot of times the students will debate their article, hate their ideas, and we bring them in live and they agree with everything they had to say. It's a total win. You do asynchronous first and then synchronous. It's like whacking the side of the head. So when you're talking about a lab experience, can be one that is just set up and pre-designed, but if you add an expert into that to comment on that concept or idea, even better. So it's a combined approach that often works best. But you have to think about and plan it ahead in some cases if you're trying to do something like my students work with students from China, and we write books together with students in China and Malaysia and all sorts of things. So we get kind of complex. But just bringing in a guest is pretty simple actually nowadays. We just started using Google Hangouts, which is free. If you've used Skype, how many of you use Skype? How many of you use Google Hangouts? You like it? Pretty simple. It's better, more crisp. Google Hangout. We did Skype a couple weeks ago, right? Yeah. It's usually reliable. Skype is pretty trusty, but Google Hangouts has a few more bells and whistles, and it's a bigger screen and so forth. Well, let's look at a couple examples, just some blended learning examples. As I said, parts 2 and 3 are going to have, I think, some additional examples that you might be able to right away take home with you. There's just a few here. So, concept animations. I spoke to electrical workers last year at this time, and they were very much into seeing animations of their safety training components, concept explanations. I spoke to CPR people, safety people, CPR people, and they had a whole series of demonstrations and concept simulations and animations. I have a colleague in anatomy at Indiana who's designed a series of human embryology animations, and the students take a test at the end of watching these animations, right? And my daughter took her class, and she said, "Dad, do you see these really cool animations?" She took her summer class. She was home for the summer, and I said, "Yeah, I know all about this." And these are free. If you're in anatomy, you can download Valerie O'Loughlin's free anatomy videos for human embryology with tests wrapped around it. So pre-tests, getting ready for the tests, is a great way to blend. So concept animation, great way to blend. Pre-test, practice tests, a great way to blend. Anchored instructions. So you have a specific content you want to teach, and you have a demonstration of how to do it, a demonstration videos, if you will. CNN and BBC and TED Talks, all these free videos on the web, we can access at any moment in time. As I said earlier, there's a website called Fora TV, called the Conference Channel or the Thinkers Channel. You may never have heard about, but they'll bring in the people who built the internet. They'll bring in the guys from Google. They'll bring in all sorts of folks. Hillary Clinton, whomever, is on Fora TV, and they make a lot of their sessions free to the world to use for reflection activity. BBC, of course, has daily news and websites that you can anchor your instruction in some kind of news for today, excite your students into something that's happening in the real world that relates to your class. Every day there's stuff from your class that's in the news. Finding it and embedding it to excite your students into the field, to me, is a big win and a reason to use video. It also anchors the learning. If everyone watches a 1-minute clip, you all have that common experience that you can come back to and reflect on. Did you catch this in the 1 minute? Let's watch that again. And you come back to it at the end. Maybe you missed this point, you see. So I think educational videos are one of the more powerful means and mechanisms, and so I've indexed 80 such portal sites I'll show after break time. My friend Aaron Daring did a TED Talk. He's into adventure learning. He goes to the Arctic. He goes to Iceland and Greenland doing global educational programs for kids around the world. He has a number of programs out there. His TED Talk, it was 20 minutes long, too long for my class, so I chop it up into pieces that I want to show my students. In the BBC, you have your top stories of today. You can just scroll on through. Of course, they had a lot of World Cup stuff a few weeks ago, not anymore here in the UK, apparently. I had to throw that in there, I'm sorry. I know I hit a sensitive nerve. Spain too, you know. As I mentioned earlier, Colorado, University of Colorado has a whole series, and they're in the book. There's a picture of this in the book. I got their permission. I wrote to the folks there. They have a whole series of simulations in physics and in biology, in chemistry, earth science, and math, whether it's heat and thermal energy, sound and waves, motions, electricity, magnets. These are little snippets, little short simulations that you interact with, make decisions about, and it gives you feedback if you got it right. These are all free. These are scientists who created free components from one of the top universities in the world. Why not explore it and think about how to use it? There's a website called Quizlet. Quizlet's a website where you can create practice tests for your students. It's the top quizzing website in the world, okay? If you haven't explored it. Now, if you're not into interactive flashcards, if you're not into objective kinds of tests, maybe you don't use this, but some areas like objective tests, okay? When I was an accountant, I was very objective. Electrical engineering, computer science, math. But if you're in English, well, you could have this, you could use this, but if you're in philosophy, you might not use this website. Virtual practice activities. You might be in the medical field. When I was visiting Sungkwangwon University, the oldest university in Korea, where the nobles were trained in the 1200s, and they were now owned by Samsung. And Samsung was building a whole suite of virtual practice activities for their doctor training, their nurse training there, training blood doctors to look at slides, dead cell slides and so forth. Screencasted tutorials. Now, this is one you may not have heard about, and I think is very important. There are a number of tools out there today to you put a headset on, you talk, and walk your students through new stuff that's happening, new technologies they might use, websites they might explore. Jing, GoView, and Screener are free tools that you can capture up to 10-minute, some go a little longer, about 10-minute tutorials. Why not capture the most difficult concepts or activities in a little tutorial? Why not give them some feedback or advice? You may never use it. Not everyone, but a few students who get, rocks along the way might go and tap into it, download it, watch it, and get, I got it. Dr. Bonk put this up there, and I got it. I'm moving on, not complaining. So this is something you can reuse then. Once you put it up there, it's simple for your labs, for instance. If you're in art, you can put video tutorials up showing how to design something in art or sculpture or whatever. There's a website called artmaker.com that does this out of Sydney. Role play. I have my students take on roles. And in fact, I enter into Moodle all sorts of people that my students might play on, like Mother Teresa, Mahatma Gandhi, all sorts of folks that they enter in. In psychology, we have Pavlov and B.F. Skinner and so forth. I enroll them in my classes, and my students might do a debate as that person. They have to read that person's work and become that person. Or they role play as themselves, or I have a debate, pro and con debate, all sorts of things that I embed in my classes to get students to open up online. We bring those debates back into class. Solution number 11, or blended learning idea number 11, is journals online. In science, there's a public library of science for genetics journals and chemistry journals and biology journals that are free articles. And now what they've done in PLOS is add interviews of the authors. There's something called SciV, Science Visualized, where you can hear from the author of what didn't get in the article, what did get in the article, where their research is going next, what they're giving up on, all this kind of stuff. This is a fascinating way to think about using the web. Instead of just reading an article, today you can actually watch a video from that person, present their research at a conference, explain the research that's in the stale, boring article. Everything's cut out. The good, juicy stuff's cut. The interview might give you some of the stuff, the side contextual information to enhance that and get them excited about the field. So in the US alone, there are over 1,100 free open access journals. In Europe, there's over 1,000 free open access journals. Australia and so forth has over 600. So there's a number of open access journals. Not all are high quality. Find the ones in your field that you respect, that are respected in your discipline. And I have a whole course with no books. We're using only open access articles. I have a 75-page syllabus. My students walk in and say, a 75-page syllabus, I'm going to die. They walk out and tell me it's not long enough, because they don't have to read the whole thing. It's there as a guide when they leave. They have to read 3 or 4 or 5 a week, articles, 6, and then they push on to the next week. They pick what they want from this open access. Podcast reflections. So my students might listen to podcast shows of experts in my field, or it might be in finance, might be in some accounting or whatever field you're in. There's going to be a podcast show, and this is called MedicCast, with the different shows each week coming up. You might connect in. I was speaking to paramedics and CPR people, so I was at this website listening in. I don't know what this guy is, but he's somewhere here in the UK. I don't know if he's any good or not. I just throw his face up there. Has anyone seen this guy? No. So anyways, podcasts. I did a series of podcasts in psychology, very short ones, 5 minutes long for each week of the class. Unfortunately, my podcast partner died after doing one of the last shows, and so I haven't picked up doing podcasts again. He was a fabulous guy. We had a really good rapport doing podcasts. And podcasts were really popular back about 6-7 years ago. Not as much today. We see more people doing other things in media today, more simulations, more video than podcasts. Referenceware online. Wikipedia might not be the tool of choice for all of you. However, there are tools out there like the Encyclopedia of the Earth. There's also the British Library Turning the Pages website, where they've scanned in original documents of Beethoven, Mozart, and the Magna Carta, and all sorts of things with audio files wrapped around them. The Smithsonian's in the US. The United Nations has a digital library of cultures of the world. The guy teaching history, who's the history person? You've seen this United Nations World Digital Library, fascinating website. There's some high quality contents that we call referenceware. Okay, embedding in online thesauruses, dictionaries, encyclopedias, not just wiki species from the Wikimedia Foundation. I've studied Wikipedia and wiki books. My students write wiki books, but higher quality stuff comes from, like I said, Smithsonian's, NASA, other places. So embedding in ways to use referenceware. Number 14, having students explore the web. Now, these are teachers in Jamaica who are exploring, giving themselves 1 hour to explore and find things that they can use in class. We just don't tend to do this. I think instruction, instead of being 80% instruction, 20% testing, should be 20% direct instruction, 20% competition, 20% collaboration, 20% group discussion, and 20% exploration. It's in exploration that creativity happens and spontaneous learning happens. Google has 20% time. Google Gmail was created. Google Toolbar was created. Google Calendar was created, all during the free time that engineers could explore. Think about that from the standpoint of your classes. I once had what's called Library Week, where every student had to find 20 articles and summarize them for me in 1 week, whatever they wanted. I thought they'd hate me for the week because it's 5 times more than what I would assign. They loved that week the best. I made 2 weeks Library Week of my 15. I control 13 weeks, they control 2 weeks. They have to read 30 articles. So that's this notion of exploration, finding that moment in your course where students can explore a bit, where here we have students exploring OER, Open Ed resources. Number 15, demonstrations and interactions. Here's a lab coming from a company called Cyber Anatomy. You want to explore a circulatory system? They have the tools for that. Blood pressure activities and so forth. doing x-rays, body scans, whatever. They have a whole series of things, not just in biology, but in chemistry and other disciplines, physics and other disciplines as well. This is a company out of Iowa. You know, Iowa, by the way, stands for I oughta went around. Don't ever go to Iowa. It's just a bunch of corn, you know. I'm from Wisconsin. We don't like people from Iowa, or Illinois people either. Wolfram Alpha. Now this guy's Stephen Wolfram. He's from Illinois. We don't really like him that much. He's from Illinois. But he created the site called Wolfram Alpha, which is a database of everything. You want to learn how many calories you're going to have for lunch today? They have a tool for doing that in there. You want to compare the GDP of South Korea and the UK? They have a tool, a comparison and contrast. You want your kids can do their calculus and get their answers from Wolfram Alpha. It's a database of everything. Oceanography, civil engineering, biology. Check this website out. What I have my students do is a lot of short little web explorations, and then they share what they found. We summarize what they found. We do online activities wrapped around this. Now he calls himself the next Einstein, not so sure, okay? But yeah. Now language learning is exploding online, where you have someone remotely interacting and conversing to learn Spanish, Portuguese, French, Arabic, whatever. This area with Live Mocha, with Chinese Pod, Spanish Pod, and so forth is a hugely growing. Millions of people learning and teaching languages online today. There are polyglots out there learning a dozen languages within a couple of years. And so some people teaching languages online are embedding in Skype activities or Google Hangout activities, one-to-one mentoring with students around the world. I don't think we have any language people here, but I thought I'd mention it. Number 18 is bringing in this virtual guest. Now, I just said goodbye to this guy at the train station in Peterborough. His name is Jim Hensman, and Sarah DeFreitas, his colleague, is now pushed on to Perth, to Curtin, and now Murdoch. But they were my guests last semester in my class. Jim and I went to Cambridge yesterday and had a great old time. This woman here has a book called Second Life for Dummies. She's a Second Life virtual worlds person with red hair. Here's me with a pink wig on to make her feel at home. From my house, that's her house. I brought her into my class. Every week I'm bringing somebody in to have a discussion. Or I might use their TED Talk in my class and embed in some activity. This guy here, Sagata Mitra, won the TED Outstanding Award and $1 million to build self-organized learning environments around the world. He built the Hole in the Wall project in India, in Mumbai, where kids were teaching each other how to use computers. He built the Granny Cam project, where grandmothers in the UK, retired teachers, could interact with kids in India and teach them something 1 hour a week, all free to the world. Interesting guy. So my students watch this one. We brought them in last year to talk about gaming, the Serious Gaming Center in Coventry. That's where Jim's at, in Coventry. So bringing in guests from around the world to talk to your students and get them inspired, get them excited, and so forth. This is the Dalai Lama's sister. Now, the Dalai Lama comes to Bloomington, Indiana a number of times. His brother was a professor on our campus in religion, recently passed away. But we bring the Dalai Lama in sometimes to talk to students in southern Indiana in the International Studies in Schools project, get them excited about the cultures of the world kind of thing. Number 20, timeline tools, taxonomy tools, concept mapping tools, getting thought visualized. There's a tool called bubble.us. There's other tools like FreeMind and CMAP that let you put thought on display, show your linkages, your connections, your macro contexts, your micro concepts, the causal relations in and among concepts. I've been studying concept mapping for a couple of decades now, looking at the depth of students' learning, the breadth of students' learning, but they're forced with this tool to share what they've learned, and I might have them printed out, bring to a face-to-face class and put it on the board, and they have a poster session on their concept maps, okay? If some of you are shaking your heads, yes, you're using concept maps. A decade ago, none of these existed. I was complaining last time I saw Mark about the lack of concept mapping tools that were out there, simple ones. Today it's exploded, and timelines as well. This tool is called Poplet, where embedded in Poplet, you can have a concept map with video links, with audio file links like hypermedia, like a Prezi presentation, if you've seen Prezi. Poplet is collaborative, so it's more than one person can work together to create a Poplet, a knowledge structure, a collaborative knowledge network, if you will. So student collaborative knowledge building and sharing in Poplet. Media online, there are a number of maps. I'm going to come back after break in parts 2 and 3 and talk about maps, where you can see things like, in this case, we have a map of Korean Americans and European Americans. You can see the percentages of where they live within the United States. You can change the variable and compare it to Latinos or some other variables. You can also look at things besides demographics. You can look at economic data, but maps are ways to visualize your content area. There are a number of maps out there today that might help you understand growing seasons are changing, global warming's having an impact, deforestation in different parts of the world. There's a new one that just came out a few weeks ago on deforestation and global warming, looking at sea rising. Maps are a way to visualize data. In fact, here's one on looking at climate maps in the US and how our growing patterns in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois have changed. We can grow plants now an additional month compared to 20 years ago in the US. And it's causing some problems in all sorts of things. Ticks in the US this year are abundant. Early, in fact, this year. That's one thing it's changed. So longitudinal online maps that show different things over time, how it changed over 30 years or 20 years or 10 years or whatever. Visualizing is important, not just reading. And finally, just online collaboration in general. This is Google Hangouts. Every week, astronauts at the space station have a chat with students around the world. Google Hangouts is a tool anyone can use and pop on and use and get people involved. Google Documents, Skype, all these are collaborative technologies. To be honest, back in 1990, when I studied online collaboration, there were some pretty cool tools that existed back then that are better than some of the things we have today. They were mostly for the Macintosh. I was a PC user at the time. I had to switch for a while because their PCs were too expensive for collaboration. Macintosh had it all. We've kind of gone backwards in some ways from 20, 25 years ago for online collaboration. There was a tool called Aspects where everyone could write on the same paper at the same time, just different lines, back from '89, believe it or not, and add media elements to it and all sorts of things. Anyhow, my '98 book started discussing collaboration online. I'm starting to get reinterested in that again. So I've gone through definitions, myths, models, examples of blended learning, 24 odd examples. I had more in there than what I remembered, so hopefully one or so of those you can download in NAB. I'm going to pause because we're getting ready for break here. In fact, we're supposed to be on break already. And pause for questions here first and see if we've got anything you can actually take away and walk with in part 1. So let me field questions first, and then I'm going to do a little activity, and then we'll take a break. Okay. I've got a counter. A simple way to embed technology in your classes is to use a simple counter. These are free on the web, so it's not 99 seconds. I have my students come up to the front. They get 99 seconds of fame. They have to give me a quote from articles they've read, and why are those quotes important to them? I'll have all 20 students come up, read quotes, summarize 99 seconds, and in effect they're lecturing to each other on the content. Instead of me just lecturing, they're doing that. Also a way to process what they've gotten from a group activity. Each group gets 3 minutes or 4 minutes. There's different timers out there that you can use. I loaded 2 timers on the system here for Mark. You can get them on your, if you have a flash memory stick, you can download them during break if you're interested in that. What I'd like you to do is to stand up with both your sheets, the topics and the questions. I'd like you to find someone, everyone stand up. I'd like you to find someone who's not at your table, who maybe you don't know previously, you've never met before. I want you to introduce yourself with your question and with your topics, and I'll give you 99 seconds to make that introduction to one another and answer each other's questions if you can. I'll be back. Not at your table. It has to be somebody not at your table. It has to be So to help students get involved in this, number one, teachers have to model. I had a student in 1998 studied 10 online instructors, 5 of which didn't do much at all online, and 5 did a fair bit. And modeling was key to the students being in, and being in early. If you're having discussion forums, if the instructor's in last, the students will all go in last. They'll procrastinate too. Second, we have developed. I like to push students to the point of tears. And so when I get a crier come up to me, I know I have to pull back a bit. And so what we've done we have in-service teacher training as the first one. Second courses I taught online for Southern Indiana rural teachers, and I'd get crier or 2 out of 30, and I'd show them the website with prior student work. and they'd cry, the tears would go away. And they say, I can do that, I can do that. So part of the way to get them to use technology is to put best examples up there and raise the bar higher every time. And you wouldn't believe the challenges that students want to meet. So that's the second thing you can do to inspire, to get their confidence up, to avoid them having a nervous breakdown, and then to get them started. The third thing you can do in your class, I kind of alluded to earlier, is that you might form teams. Students, I have critical friends in class who give each other support and feedback, or web buddies or whatever. That's another thing that you can do. I also have students, if it's a face-to-face class, who might be demonstrating the technology to each other in a computer lab. Instead of me demonstrating, their peers are demonstrating how to use technology. And the screener in GoView, putting the headset on for the really nervous older student who comes back to school for the first time in 30 years, to have the screen capture and all they have to do is click and play and see it. That might help. A guide sheet, a worksheet, what we call a job aid. When we did wiki stuff, we did wiki books, it didn't work the first time, but when we put a little job aid advice, it worked really well. So sometimes it doesn't work the first time, but don't give up on it. It's the second time, a small tweak will change it from being a class where most people aren't using it to a class where most are actually engaged in using it because you figured out a couple little subtle things you need to do. If it doesn't work twice, give up on it. But don't give up on it after once.
I've given up on it at all.
So there you go. My students studied the teachers, what the successful ones did. They polled what technology you want to use. You know, what do you recommend? Here's a list of things we can do. Check off the things you'd like. You know, look at that the first week and have it mesh with what you'd like. You know, pick some of theirs and find a happy medium in between. It doesn't have to be everything they want to do nor everything you plan to do, but find that happy balance. I didn't want to use Google Hangouts, for instance, but my TA, coming from Cyprus, she said, Dr. Bonk, you really need to think about Google Hangouts. You know, and she was right. You know, I needed her to push me a bit. Other students in the class tell me I need to do this or that. I've never heard of this before. I'm a little, you know, when a student shares something with me I've never heard of, I'm a little reluctant, actually. So chapter 14 of my book is on helping reluctant instructors, myself included sometimes. 10 ways to help and support instructors. It was supposed to be in my 2008 book, but the publisher deleted 6 chapters. That chapter, John Wiley, Josie Bass deleted it, and it's the most popular chapter in the book. It never got in the book. So we rewrote it, and it's in the new book. So it kind of answers your question in a different way, not just supporting students, but how to support instructors. And there are different things you can do for recognition of instructors, mentoring programs, best practices, and there's 10 ideas. A couple more, and we'll take a break.